All right, everyone, welcome once again. We are ready to get started. We'll probably have some more folks joining us as we move forward. But I'm Brian Watkins. I'm the Director of Parent and Family Affairs at the University of Maryland, and I'm also the founder and chair of the university's Fostering Term Success Initiative. And we are thrilled to host the convening today, and just so glad that so many of you could join us. This gathering is the result of several years of work with a synergy that began with the Prince George's County 100 Days to End Youth Homelessness project. And that was a springboard for higher ed institutions in Prince George's County to work collectively to address housing instability for our students. And as we all know, this work is bigger than Prince George's County. And I want to thank and acknowledge all of those who are present here and who aren't able to participate today, who are part of the Higher Ed Basic Needs Advocacy Coalition, for ensuring that this work moves forward and that we work collectively to address these important issues and work across the state to do so. We're here hosting this convening, and the coalition has planned this convening because we wanted to provide a way for folks to get together around a common understanding for supporting students' basic needs. And our time together really is designed for all of us to learn from each other, identify strengths and challenges of this work, and advocate within our institutions and organizations so we can continue moving forward for our students. Just want to spend a very short amount of time reviewing the agenda today. So we're going to share that on the screen. And as you take a look at that, the agenda today really is grounded in student perspectives and an understanding of the student experience. So, today is about students. And our first speaker is going to really set the tone for us today, and I will introduce her in just a second. We'll focus on a national perspective to give you some, after we focus on the student perspective and share student insights around some surveys and research that we've done, that the coalition has done. We'll share some a national perspective of strategies in higher ed institutions nationwide. So we have a representative from Schoolhouse Connection to do that. And then we'll go back to our survey results and talk about the institutional results. So we'll have a state perspective. And then I'll share some information about the work that we've done here at the University of Maryland so that you have an institutional perspective. And finally, we'll move to breakout rooms so that all of us have an opportunity to have some discussion around steps that we can take on our own at our own institutions. And then we'll have a little wrap up before we all continue the rest of our day. But we want to make sure that we have some time together at the end to talk about what kind of next steps we can have so that so that this isn't a one-shot deal with this convening, that we can keep working together. Before I introduce our first speaker, I want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded. And so we ask that you please remain muted throughout until we go to our breakout groups. And all the participants, all of you are going to receive materials from the presentation today, as well as a post-event survey. So we'd really appreciate it if you take some time to complete that survey, because it's really helpful for us to make sure that we have an opportunity to evaluate the day, and it will help inform our practices moving forward. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dejanay Day. Dejanay is a youth advocate for Prince George's County and the co-chair of our Youth Action Board. So Dejanay, thanks for being with us today.
No, thank you for inviting me. So again, my name is Dejanay Day, and I am one out of two co-chairs for the Youth Action Board in Prince George's County, Maryland. And I'm gonna wait for the slide to move so I can get started. There we go. All right, so I can get started. The pictures on the screen is me at graduation, May 25th, 2018, from the University of Maryland, Eastern Shore. What you see is a happy person, a successful graduate. But behind those pictures is 3 to 4 years of being mistreated in my household and being put out by my mother twice because I pursued a higher education. In the midst of all this, I had to go into an emergency shelter um, back and forth during breaks and holidays until I graduated from Eastern Shore. What you see is the bright sun on my face and a belief that I wasn't going to make it the 4 years, that I wasn't going to make it to see graduation. But what you don't see is the behind the scenes struggle of finding food when the calf was closed down at the school, or going back and forth with financial aid just so I can see if I can get the tuition waiver, which also took about a year into my sophomore year before I got it. What people don't see is a vulnerable person, because on the outside you see a strong, vibrant person that has confidence, has the most confidence in the world, and that's there to help people in need. But what people don't see is somebody that needed help at that time. Well, what some people didn't see was somebody that needed help at that time. But I was blessed to have mentors and people by my side, so I didn't struggle as much as other students that may have went through the same thing as me. They helped me with resources. They most likely help with expediting the process for the tuition waiver under Maryland with the financial aid office, because my mentors did work with University of Maryland Eastern Shore, excuse me. But there's some students out there that don't have mentors, don't have the guidance like right in front of them, and they probably don't even know about the tuition waiver in Maryland. And with COVID, it's a lot harder for them to go inside a financial office. It's a lot harder for them to get documents like their social and their birth certificate and a letter from the place where they're staying at, especially when it's every year. So with that, and with the pictures that you see, again, you see a successful person. You see a person that's really happy, because I was happy when I walked across the stage. But I did have trials and tribulations that was behind that. I had sad tears, happy tears. I was stressed, but I can say it was all worth it. And I would like more people that are in my shoes to kind of have the opportunity to not renew their student tuition waiver every year, but kind of for them to turn it in and they take it until they're finished college, or until the student says that they're in a stable place. So with this presentation that is coming up, we're going to take a look at some of the advantages and disadvantages different schools have in Maryland, because it's not just me. There's other kids out there again that didn't have the advantage of having a mentorship. There's some kids out there that didn't have the advantages I had to work within the delegates. There's some people that don't have the opportunity to really speak on this platform today, to tell my story, to tell their story per se, and to be able to work amongst people that care about any youth homelessness in Maryland. So with that, I thank you for listening. I thank you for looking at the wonderful pictures on the screen. And I will turn this to Ms. Joy Roberts and Ms. Daria Brown for the student insight and focus group results.
Thank you so much, Dejanay, for telling us your story. Um, Hi, everyone. My name is Daria Brown. I am the Student Rights Program Manager at Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition. Today, I will be presenting with my colleague, Joy Roberts, um, and we will be presenting on um, our focus group results from the coalition that we've been working on around student basic needs security. These focus groups were done with the support of SHIP, Frederick County, Advocates for Children and Youth, Homeless Persons Representation Project, Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition, Youth Empowered Society, His Hope Ministries, Prince George's County Department of Social Services. And in this presentation, we will go over our methods for conducting the focus groups, student demographics, the participants' demographics, as well as specific questions that we ask students about their experiences and accessing basic needs services on their schools. And then we'll finish out with some concluding thoughts. As always, if you have any questions about the focus groups or our methods or specific insights that we received from students, please feel free to leave them in the chat. Yeah, we'll be monitoring that as we go along. So next slide, please. Okay, so I first want to start off by how we, as the facilitators in conducting the focus groups, define basic needs. So we define basic needs as the most essential resources required to thrive, including access to nutritious food, stable housing, and financial wellness resources. We started conducting the focus group process by identifying 2-year and 4-year public institutions across the state of Maryland that we wanted to have student experiences and student input from. We sent out materials such as the flyer to the left of the screen out to different institutions across the state, as well as interest forms for students to fill out. We also included a $25 gift card incentive for student and participants. And out of the interest form, 63 students indicated that they wanted to participate in the focus group, which was really great. The next step in that process was having students fill out a consent agreement and a pre-survey. The pre-survey information just gave us a little bit more details about who the students were, their demographic information, what basic needs resources they had accessed while in school or that they wanted to access but didn't have the ability to access. And so an example of one of the questions on the pre-survey is on the right of the screen. And then the consent agreement just really laid out our responsibilities as facilitators of the focus groups. The fact that they were going to get a $25 gift card, the fact that we were going to be recording them during the focus groups, and as well as like what they needed to do as participants if they didn't feel comfortable doing certain things to just let us know. And so we had 33 students fill out both the consent agreement and the pre-survey. And so then the next process was actually conducting the focus groups. And this all took place within like early November to early December. And so at the end of that process, we had conducted 3 different focus groups and had a total of 15 student participants. And these students came from the University of Maryland College Park, Towson University, Frederick Community College, Prince George's Community College, Coppin State, Bowie State University, the College of Southern Maryland, and Arundel Community College. So we had a wide range of student input. And we divided the focus groups up based on students who attended 4-year institutions and then had one focus group for students who attended 2-year community colleges. And so next slide, please. Now we'll talk a little bit more about the demographic makeup of our student participants. So overwhelmingly, our student participants identified as women, with 74% being women in the focus groups, 20% being men, 3% being non-binary, and then 3% being gender nonconforming. And then in relationship to their gender identity, 85% identified as cisgender, 4% identified as biological, and then 11% just indicated that they didn't know. Next slide, please. So in terms of sexual orientation, 58% identified as heterosexual, 13% identified as bisexual, and then 16% did not wish to share or did not know. 7% identified as lesbian, 3% gay, and then 6% pansexual. Okay, and so in terms of race and identity, overwhelmingly our student participants were Black, and then we had 21% of students who participated were white, 9% were Latinx, and then 3% were Asian.
Okay, great. So before I go over the graphs, on each of the results slides, there are going to be excerpts from our student participants so that you can actually read in their own words what they thought about the topics and their own answers. The yellow gradients are going to represent students who went to four-year universities, and then the gray gradient answers are going to represent students who went to two-year colleges. I will try to remember to leave a couple seconds at the end of each slide so that everybody gets a chance to actually read those excerpts. So to begin, we asked students whether or not they had experienced homelessness in the past 12 months, and 18% of them had said that they did. Of that 18%, only 3% of them had actually received the unaccompanied homeless youth tuition waiver. A trend that or a theme that was highlighted in our focus group as well as in this student's quote was that students had the desire for their universities and college to offer more housing resources, similar to year-round housing, where students who do not have a fixed place to stay or have experienced homelessness in the past would be able to go there or will be able to stay on campus and not have to worry about housing. They also talked about being able to promote those services in such a way to where students actually know coming in the door exactly who they need to go to if they should ever actually need assistance. Next slide, please. Okay, so we also talked to students about food insecurity and what those resources look like on their campuses. And so that could be a campus pantry, that could be a meal sharing program. And a lot of the students or a lot of our participants did say that their campuses did offer those resources, but there were 25% who said that they were actually unsure whether or not their campuses had that. In our focus group, students discussed how they were really happy with some of the services that their campuses did have, but sometimes they were not very easy to access. So maybe not knowing exactly where the campus pantry is, or maybe the hours that the campus pantry holds, was not always very convenient for students. Next slide. So when we spoke with students about public benefits, they actually did not realize that if they were eligible for federal work study, which a portion of them were, they would also be eligible for SNAP benefits. And so of our participants, only 13% of them had actually accessed EBT and unemployment, and another 6 had accessed SSI or SSDI and WIC. So being able to have, or being able to know that they can access these resources and then actually accessing them would further address food insecurity as well as other basic needs for students. Go ahead. Great. So we also asked students about mental health resources on campus, and many participants said that their campuses did actually offer this resource. A trend that was highlighted in our discussion was that sometimes it was not the most accessible. Sometimes students had to wait a long time on the phone to make an appointment, or appointment hours were not conducive with their school and sometimes work schedule. And then also the cost. A lot of students, or some students, did say that they opted out of the university healthcare plan because it was just too expensive. And so another point of discussion was the promotion of services. Some students said that they learned about these services through professors versus it being common knowledge or something that the university had promoted when maybe they first came in the door, and also throughout their time in school. So I'll give people a couple seconds because these ones are a little, or one of them is a little bit longer. Okay. A resource that we asked about that did not show significant need was childcare, but it may still be beneficial to do a much deeper dive because students in our focus groups, they discussed that they knew other people who needed this resource, even though they did not personally need it. And those friends that they had that needed the resource did not always have the means to actually be able to access free childcare or reduced childcare on campus. And so the last result that we've highlighted today was for transportation for students. We asked students whether or not their universities or colleges gave them access to reduced or free passes for their local transportation. And while 12% of them said that they did access it, 41% of them said that they were actually unsure. So this could speak to that larger issue of promotion of services on campus. Another conversation that we had that I don't think we were expecting to have was students' ability to even utilize the shuttles that their colleges and universities provide. A couple of students discussed how sometimes those shuttle stops are not very conveniently located to where they live, and so then they have to catch public transportation just to catch the shuttle just to get to school. And depending upon where you live, public transportation doesn't always run very quickly and very often. And so some students did resort to using an Uber or a Lyft, and that can add up. If you are taking an Uber or Lyft every single day to get to and from the shuttle stop or from the bus, it definitely adds up, especially for a student. And so now we're going to kick it back to Daria, and she's going to wrap up with some more student insights.
Thank you, Joy. So again, these are the insights that we gained from students from doing our focus groups. It's not reflective of all students' experiences at their institutions. We also asked students, but did not mention in this presentation, about resources relating to technology, equity resources on campus, as well as specifically accessing healthcare on campus. And overwhelmingly, throughout all of the questions that we asked students, they said that they knew where to look to find these resources if they needed them. But in terms of accessibility, their experience varied greatly. So moving forward, it's important that we're not only providing students with resources, but giving them the ability to access them in a manner that is safe and that doesn't have stigma associated with them. And so thank you all for listening to our presentation. I will now like to pass it over to Jillian from Schoolhouse Connection about strategies that higher education institutions nationwide have utilized.
Hi all, thank you so much. As Ed gets the slides, I just want to say that my name is Jillian Tatar. I'm the Higher Ed Program Manager at Schoolhouse Connection. And so I'm just so happy and thankful to be here with all of you today to talk about Maryland Higher Ed homeless initiatives. My background is actually in higher education and student affairs. And so I remember that this being a super busy time of the year. So thank you all so much for joining us here today. So as we get started, Schoolhouse Connection is a national organization. We are based in Washington, D.C. with a mission to overcome homelessness through education. And we do that from birth all the way up into post-secondary. And so we can go to the third slide, Ed. But we provide strategic federal and state advocacy. We provide practical assistance. We have a variety of resources on our website. We also have a Facebook group where practitioners can share various best practices or ask questions. You can sign up for our newsletter where you get all this information directly to your mailbox. And then we have an amazing youth leadership and scholarship program. So before we get started, I just want to talk about some definitions and national context before I go into these best practices. And so when we're talking about homelessness, we're using the Department of Education definition, or also known as the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness. And that is an individual who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And this could be an individual who is staying with friends, they're couch surfing. It can be an individual who's living in their car, who's living in the park, who is staying in the residence hall, but would otherwise have nowhere else to go. These are all various examples of homelessness. It's not one set thing. And so homelessness is even broken down even further into another group called unaccompanied homeless youth. And that is an individual who is under the age of 24, who meets the definition of homelessness, but is also not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. And so unaccompanied homeless youth, they have kind of a different process with financial aid and higher education, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So prior to the pandemic, the Hope Center released a national report earlier this year that found in 2019, they surveyed about 167,000 students from 171 two-year institutions and 56 four-year institutions. And they found that there are about 17% of community colleges and 16% of four-year institution students that marked that they were homeless within the last year. We imagine that these numbers are actually quite higher because many students that tend to fill out these surveys, they have the time, capacity, and technology to do so. And so the Hope Center actually released another report early this year with the pandemic, and they found, this was between mid-April to mid-May, they surveyed over 38,000 students, and again, they found about 15% of four-year institutions and 11% at two-year institutions reported homelessness. But we know that these rates were so much higher because during this time, so many of our students, even students from our own scholarship program, they didn't have access to internet, they didn't have access to a laptop. And so most likely a lot of these students that were experiencing homelessness, they weren't participating in this survey. All right, and so in 2016, the California Homeless Youth Project, they surveyed over 200 young adults throughout the state, and they asked them, what do you need to be successful in school? And the results, which you can see here on the slide, they're actually very similar to what the focus group that just presented, that we just heard from. So having a supportive, positive adult, being able to access and meet their basic needs, financial aid help, and just knowledge, again, of the existing campus support programs and resources. And so these next few slides, I'm going to share some of the examples of best practices from colleges and universities from across the country. If you have some of these best practices at your institution, please share them in the chat box. We'd love to learn from you as well. And also feel free to ask questions. Hopefully I'll have a little bit of time to answer them in person, but I'll definitely get to them in the chat box. So for the first one is transition from high school. We know that's pretty daunting, just in general for all students, but for homeless students, it's even more so. They might have had a support system from their counselors or their McKinney-Vento liaisons, and then they might lose it all once they graduate. We had a student from our scholarship program share that graduating high school was the most devastating day of her life, because she lost that support system for those 4 years, and she didn't know anyone in the college or to support her during graduation in between that period. And so with COVID, we saw that many students experience summer melt, which is the 2 to 3 months leading up to the fall, where a student has every intention of going to college. They're enrolled, they paid deposits down, but then they fall off the radar and end up not actually getting to college in that fall. They might have decided to do a gap year or go to a 2-year college instead of a 4-year institution. And enrollment rates are looking to be even lower this year based upon current FAFSA completion rates. And so to combat summer melt, we've seen really great strategies from both high schools and colleges and partnerships between the two to start preparing students. So Fresno County in California, they have this amazing I-Plan. It's a booklet that they give to juniors and seniors in high school that starts talking and preparing them about college. We have a liaison in Florida who conducted a McKinney-Vento college tour and brought students to different colleges around the state. She wrote a really powerful blog post about how and why she did it. And right now with the pandemic, you can make this even virtual. You can do, a webinar just like this and invite different colleges to join in and your students as well, so they can hear and talk to folks at that institution, hear about different resources. There's also summer bridge programs. So we know that summer bridge programs really help transition students to acclimate to campus. Some summer bridge programs are specifically first gen or low income specific. Florida State has the Unconquered Scholars Program, which is specifically for foster, homeless, wards of the state, and relative care students. We did a webinar with them. It's archived on our website, but it's a really amazing program. I highly suggest you all check it out. And then lastly, we have homeless higher ed liaisons. And so these are individuals who are the single point of contact for homeless youth on the college campus. And they really mimic their K through 12 counterparts. They serve as that point of contact, and they can bridge that gap between high school and college and ensure a warm handoff. And so these liaison roles, they're becoming more and more popular at colleges, either because there's a state policy or colleges just are recognizing that it's the best practices and giving folks that responsibility. But with the pandemic, we really want to make sure that we want to emphasize the importance of checking in with students consistently, and especially during that summer, and that all students have the documentation and just that smooth transition into college. Next. All right, FAFSA. So again, FAFSA is really complicated and confusing to begin with, but for unaccompanied homeless youth, it's even more complex. And we heard from Dejanay herself some of the struggles that she had with the tuition waiver and just the FAFSA. And so unaccompanied homeless youth are considered independent students, which means they do not need to include parental information on the FAFSA. But in order to be considered independent, they need to receive a determination letter from one of 4 authorized entities. So 1 is a McKinney-Vento liaison, 2 and 3, it's a HUD or RHYA shelter director, and then 4, it's a financial aid administrator. And these students need to do this process every single year that they're filling out the FAFSA, which can be really traumatizing and really retriggering for students, having to share their story over and over again, and it still might not go through. And because of COVID, we are seeing such lower FAFSA numbers than before. We're seeing lower enrollment numbers, but we also are imagining that a lot of current college students, their financial system has changed. And so financial aid administrators, they might need to be making more determinations than before. And so we've done great resources with NASFA, the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. We've done webinars with them. We've provided resources with them to really just emphasize the importance of homeless youth and FAFSA barriers. The University of Oregon, they actually partnered, their basic needs office partnered with their financial aid office and watched the webinar and said, okay, how can we be better partners? How can we ensure that we're not adding additional barriers for students? We also ask that financial aid offices send, reminder emails, texts, calls, letting folks know that right now the FAFSA is open for the new school year. The faster you fill it out, the more likely you can receive the most amount of aid. We also are encouraging office hours or virtual office hours for financial aid offices, just because it is a really confusing process. We want to make sure students understand what they need to do. Another best practice is the use of emergency aid and CARES funding. Before COVID, we know that about 3 million students every year were dropping out due to some sort of bill that they needed to pay immediately. And so it could be because their car broke down or a medical emergency, or they were just falling behind on bills. And so emergency funds are super helpful for every student, but it's especially key for homeless students because it can prevent them from dropping out of school or from losing their housing. And so we advocate that students experiencing homelessness get priority emergency aid or priority CARES funding, and that these funds, that students don't have to pay them back. We don't want them to be loans. We don't want them to have to pay anything back or with interest. And we also ask that students don't need to exhaust their financial aid before utilizing these funds as well. All right, so for identification, so we need to identify these students in order for us to support them. And so some colleges might have an optional homeless question on their college application, where if a student notes that they are experiencing homelessness or deal with housing insecurity, they might receive an introductory email to different resources and that homeless higher ed liaison and say, hey, you marked that you were homeless. Did you know that we offer X, Y, and Z on our campus? And so again, it kind of provides that support and that warm handoff. The University of Illinois Chicago, they asked a question for all of their incoming first-year students and asked them, what do you think is going to be an obstacle or a barrier for you to be successful this year? And so there's another optional part for students to say, you know, I'm dealing with food or housing insecurity. I have children. I am a foster care student. I'm a veteran. So again, once students receive and mark that down, University of Illinois lets them know of various resources. Again, I mentioned that some institutions have homeless higher ed liaisons. We've seen some institutions take it even a step further, like at Ball State, who not only have this homeless higher ed liaison, but they have many higher ed liaisons too in key offices. So like in financial aid or in housing, they have someone specifically who's trained on working with homeless students. And so they are aware of their distinct needs and services. So when a student needs to get referred to that office, they can get referred to that specific person who might be a little bit more sensitive to their needs. Having a clear referral system is also important. So if you do come across a student experiencing homelessness, you know exactly who and where to go. Sometimes there's a divide between student affairs and academic affairs, but we've seen a lot of progress with faculty members. Again, we heard that in the focus groups as well, but some faculty might be adding a note on their syllabus, kind of similar to what is on that orange box on the slide, to let folks know, hey, these issues are completely normal. It's okay if you're experiencing this. Here are some resources to help. And for campuses that are going remote, faculty might be the only higher ed person that a student is interacting with consistently. So we've seen faculty members create their own surveys and ask students what they need to be successful in their course. So highly recommend training, informing, and utilizing faculty to further support students. All right, housing support. So prior to the pandemic, there were a lot of different housing support services. I'm going to share a few of them, but just keep in mind, some of them might not be as feasible because of COVID. So for institutions that have residence halls, a really easy but impactful change is to give priority housing to students experiencing homelessness. So whether that is just for the regular housing process or with COVID, allowing those students to get first priority to stay on campus if they are only offering X amount of spots. Having emergency housing is also another great best practice. Sacramento State has a really robust emergency housing program. They have rooms that are set aside for students to use. They can stay there for up to 30 days. They provide them with a meal plan during that time. They're also working with a case manager. They just did a really great webinar and they had a manual as well. So if you'd like a copy of those, feel free to reach out to me and I can send that to you. Other examples is that during the breaks for both like winter break or the summer break, campuses might need to rely on using hotels or Airbnbs. We just did a partnership document with Youth Law Center and Youth Villages for homeless and foster youth over the holidays during COVID. Some colleges might have decided to keep their residence halls open, or at least just one that's all year round. So then we see a really great partnership where folks are saying, all right, these students, I know that they're homeless, so we need to purposefully put them in that residence hall that's going to be open year round so they don't have any issues with housing. But for off-campus housing, it gets a little bit tricky. And so you might need to rely on the community a little bit more. So that's why partnering with local hotels or motels or host homes can be really helpful. There also might be specific shelters that are focused specifically for youth or for college-focused students. Jóvenes is also, that's in California. They're a really great rapid rehousing model. They provide subsidized housing with case management support to community college students, and they utilize peer navigators to help identify and find students. Sometimes you just got to get super creative. And again, these might not be applicable because of the pandemic, but I know in Minnesota, there was an assisted living home called Winona Health, where they had empty rooms in the assisted living home, and they allowed students to stay there. They paid a small stipend, and then they made up the difference in volunteer hours. Other campuses use apps like Nesterly or HomeShare. Again, it's like a host home model. Massachusetts had a pilot program where community colleges were partnering with four-year institutions that had beds on campus, where the community college students were living at the four-year institution residence halls, still going to the community college. And their hopes were that once they graduated the community college, they would transfer over to that four-year institution. And so with the pandemic, we just want to make sure that we ask that campuses allow students to stay on campus and to prioritize homeless students and ensure that they have access to food, resources, support, and everything. All right, so now we have some other strategies that we consider best practices. We know the power of peer mentorship. We have our own youth scholarship program that's really strong. Middle Tennessee State University also has a really great, strong peer mentorship program for homeless students for you to look into. Making sure that your food banks, pantries also have perishable foods, hygiene items, childcare items, cleaning supplies, all of these things. We want to make sure it's as easy for students to get all that they need in a one-stop shop. Meal swipes are also really great, so students can donate their unused swipes for the year. Other resources like having a textbook library. Textbooks are expensive, so having that library option is awesome. A library or laptop loan program, hotspot loan program. We definitely saw a need for that with, the digital divide, with a lot of campuses going remote. Other institutions might offer shower or laundry services. College of the Redwoods in California, they partner with their athletic team or their athletic department to provide laundry services for students experiencing homelessness. We know that about 1 in 5 college students have children. So again, providing options for childcare, which we heard in the focus group as well, and making sure that there's a 2-generational approach so that the child is getting the adequate and care that's needed. And then a really other big resource that has also been mentioned is mental health services with teletherapy. We know a lot of these students have undergone tremendous trauma, and so we want to make sure that they are getting all the support that they need. Great. And so lastly, we have advocacy. So many institutions have done surveys to address basic needs, whether they've created their own survey themselves as an institution or partnered with the Hope Center. But learning the needs is the best way to advocate for change for your students. And also by trainings like this, it's a really great way to learn, what are the best practices, what our other colleges are doing, and how can we learn from them? And so then you can create different task forces and find other people on campus who have similar passions and beliefs and can work together to make that change. But we also want to make sure that in these advocacy efforts, we have students that are represented and have a voice. So I'm just so happy and glad that Dejanay was here to speak with us today and share her story and her perspective. Some colleges might also have, a homeless youth organization or a group, and listening to them is important. Some higher ups might need data and that survey to inform changes on their campus, but others might need to hear, student stories and students' experiences. Policy advocacy, both on the state and federal level, is another great way to enact systemic change. Schoolhouse Connection has worked on a variety of state laws for students experiencing homelessness in higher ed, and also on the federal level as well. So we're currently working on a bill that will streamline the FAFSA process on the federal level. So keep your eyes on that. And then for the next slide, we have different resources that I've linked to. And so I know a copy of this PowerPoint is getting sent out to everyone, but I shared a lot of different institutional examples with you all, but they all can be found on the Tips for Helping Homeless Youth Succeed. These are living documents that get updated every few months. So again, if you're doing something really amazing and great, share it with me. We want to add it to our tip sheets. We also have other archived webinars, our dedicated FAFSA page that has all things FAFSA, and just a ton of other higher ed resources that are both COVID specific and really just general wealth of knowledge. But I think we might have a few minutes for me to answer questions if there are any, but so I'll just see if there are any questions in the chat box before we get to Isabel next to share institutional survey results. But I know this was a lot, so if folks have any questions, I'm happy to answer them right now. I am going to drink some water because I talked really fast for a long time. Okay, so we have someone who asked, what's your recommendation on how to determine students who are homeless or at risk? So I think that's, oh, okay, sorry, people are typing in. Yeah, I think just having conversations with students and asking them about their living situation. And so we definitely want to be mindful and not pry. And so I know for financial aid administrators, when they are trying to identify, is a student an unaccompanied homeless youth, they really should be focusing on, is the student experiencing homelessness and are they on their own? They shouldn't be asking, why. And we know that sometimes they do, but that should not be the focus. They really should just be figuring out, okay, did you experiencing homelessness on your own, or were you self-supporting on or after July 1st of whatever the year that they're applying for the FAFSA? And so NCHE has a really great resource tool, and it's on our FAFSA page, which I can add to the chat as well. But it's a really great tool for financial aid administrators when they're making that determination. They can just fill out that form and then they're good to go. For us here at Schoolhouse Connection, if you are not a financial aid administrator, but are a McKinney-Vento liaison, or you are a shelter director for HUD or RHYA, we have our own form that you can use, which can serve as a determination letter as well. But again, the focus really should be on if the student is living on their own, or if they're homeless, or if they are self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. Feel free to ask questions as our microgrants prove to be effective in addressing student homelessness. Yes, so we actually did a resource, I think earlier, 2020 has been so long, but I think we did a resource earlier this year, or end of last year, that talked about how microgrants and emergency aid are a proven tool for students experiencing homelessness. I think it was the University of Washington, Tacoma. A large majority of their emergency aid funds, they were able to determine that most of the funds that they were using, it went directly to a housing related cost. So whether it was helping to pay rent or helping to pay utilities or anything along those lines, most of those students that were using their emergency aid was because of a housing related cost. And I believe at Sacramento State, the institution that has a really great emergency housing program, they are planning on doing an emergency aid fund specifically for housing costs, just because they were noticing that, again, most of their emergency aid was going to something housing related. So they are doing a grant specifically for housing related costs. All right, so feel free to keep asking questions on the chat. I'll turn it over to Isabel now, just so we can stay on time. But thank you all so much for tuning in, and let me know if you have any other questions.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Isabel McLean, and I'm an intern with the Homeless Persons Representation Project in Baltimore City. And today I'm going to be talking with you all about a survey that our coalition conducted in October and November of this year to look at the ways in which higher education institutions across Maryland address their students' basic needs. So taking a little bit about what we've heard from Jillian and moving it to an institution level local to Maryland. So we define basic needs for of the survey as the most essential resources required to thrive, including access to nutritious food, stable housing, financial wellness resources, and more. And before I move on, I did just want to remind you all that you will be given access to this PowerPoint at the end, because I'll be going over a lot of information. So no need to rush and take notes. So here's the roadmap for my brief presentation today. I'll be sharing information about the institutions that responded to the survey, how these institutions assess their student needs, how they conduct outreach to students, who are the institutional contacts for these type of services, and a broad overview of, like, in general, the basic needs services offered. And then I'll look in more detail at food, off-campus housing, on-campus housing services, and financial aid supports. So 17 out of the 30 schools that we contacted across Maryland responded to the survey. And here is a list of those schools. All respondents were from public colleges or universities, 5 of which were 4-year schools and 12 were 2-year schools. On average, each submission was 65% complete. So for some questions, we don't have answers from all of the schools that responded. But before I move on, I want to take a moment to thank everyone who participated in this survey. I know a few of you, or maybe a lot of you, are on this call. And I just want you to know that we really appreciate you, and we're incredibly grateful for the time that you gave to completing this survey. So, all right. So 47% of the schools, or 8 schools, reported that they collect data regarding basic needs and security among students. And 5 of those 8 schools reported that they disaggregated that data by race and ethnicity. We asked about disaggregating the data according to other characteristics, as you can see here, but race and ethnicity were the most common. Next slide. When asked about how they conduct outreach to students in need and how they identify students in need, 82% of all 17 schools reported that they have a web page about basic needs resources on their website. Other commonly used forms of outreach or identification of students included general marketing to the student body through, like, flyers or posters, or information sent directly to every individual student, possibly through, like, a school-wide email, orientation programming, FAFSA responses, and information listed on class syllabi. So I know some of those were mentioned best practices from Jillian as well. Next slide. So we also asked institutions about their point of contact for basic needs assistance, specifically if they had a single point of contact or multiple points of contact. So there's been research about the single point of contact model, which Jillian also mentioned a little bit earlier, suggesting that a single point of contact might make the path to services more clear and accessible. So that's why we asked this question. So 75% of the schools who responded indicated that they do have a single point of contact, and that point of contact, like, their specific role, really varied across the institution. Sometimes that contact was in the financial aid office or student life or the counseling center, and in some instances, institutions had a specially created center or office for this purpose. Next slide. So we also asked about other contacts or offices, such as if the school has a work group that's focused on providing solutions to hunger and food insecurity on campus, a point person to help students apply for public benefits, specifically this Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or SNAP, and if they had a designated financial aid liaison for students experiencing homelessness or with a history of foster care involvement. So 60% of the school, sorry, could you go back? So 60% of the schools said that they do have a hunger task force or hunger work group, and 54% said they do have a designated financial aid liaison. And then only 27% reported having a designated staff person to help apply for public benefits. Now, next slide. Thank you. So we asked about a broad array of services to meet basic needs, which include all the ones you see on this slide here, like housing support, food insecurity, financial assistance. If schools had specifically targeted supports for LGBTQIA plus students, access to free technology, etc. In addition to the ones on here, we also asked about childcare and assistance in applying for public benefits. But I couldn't quite fit it on the slide, and only one school indicated that they provided each of those services. So these are the more common services. And as you can see, all 16 of the schools that replied to this question reported that they offer some form of food security services. 14 offer mental health care, 13 offer access to free technology, and 12 have emergency funds for students. So in the following slides, I'll go into a little bit more detail about some of these services. So for food security, all 15 schools that responded to this question said that they have a food pantry on campus, 3 of which include prepared food in addition to canned goods and groceries. Sorry that my chart is messed up, at least you can see the numbers. 2 schools indicated that they have a meal sharing program, like a meal swipe program that Jillian mentioned earlier, where students can donate any unused meal credits to other students. And 5 schools said that they have gift cards or like meal vouchers to give to students. We did also ask if any of the institutions had any on-campus retailers that accepted SNAP benefits or EBT card benefits, and none of them reported that they do, which was not surprising because it's a very difficult process to become an EBT retailer, but we did just want to ask about it. Next slide. All right, so we asked in further detail about off-campus housing services, which applied to all of the schools that we surveyed. And you can see in this table each of the types of services that we asked about. But the most common forms were housing search help, helping the students find housing off campus, connecting students to community-based resources, and 5 schools indicated that they have partnerships with private housing organizations and or local homeless services such as subsidized housing or emergency shelters. Next slide. So only 4 of the schools that responded to our survey indicated they have on-campus housing services, which makes sense because there were much fewer 4-year universities that responded. But it is interesting to note that all 4 of these institutions offer year-round housing, and it's available to all students. All of the 4-year colleges did say that the year-round housing does mean an additional cost to students, but except for St. Mary's College of Maryland, which reported that housing is free over winter break and low cost over summer break. And then with regards to priority on-campus housing, 2 of the schools reported that they do give students experiencing homelessness or with a history of foster care involvement priority for on-campus housing, both like year-round and during the school year. And the other 2 reported that they don't necessarily have a priority housing mandate just because it's not necessary because they don't reach their housing capacity. Next slide. All right, so lastly, we asked about various financial aid supports. And this section was the most incomplete of our survey, so we don't have as much data about it. We specifically asked some questions about the tuition waiver for unaccompanied youth experiencing homelessness in Maryland that my colleagues have mentioned a few times before. And many respondents reported that they simply didn't know about students at their school receiving it, or they had incomplete information, which that in and of itself might be interesting data of use because it implies that perhaps there is a lack of knowledge or clear communication overall about the tuition waiver. So I was hoping that we could take a minute now for everyone or participants to write in the chat if they are familiar with the tuition waiver, specifically the tuition waiver for unaccompanied youth experiencing homelessness in Maryland, and if they have any questions about it. I'm going to finish up my presentation while y'all do that, but my colleague Ingrid is managing the chat, so she can respond to any questions. So next, oh, actually, sorry, one more point. There is we also asked schools about if they offered an appeals process for any adverse financial aid decisions. And 73% of the 11 schools that responded to that question said that they do. So I would tell you some of the information about the tuition waiver, but it's very incomplete. So we can move on. All right, well, that is the end of my presentation. If you all have any questions about the survey, feel free to add them in the chat, or you can email me at this email address. And again, you'll get these slides at a later date. So thank you. I will pass it on to Brian and Alex at Fostering Church Success.
Thanks very much. Let me get to our presentation. All right, so we want to share a little bit about the work that we've done on our campus at the University of Maryland and share information about our Foster and Terp Success program. I'm sorry if it feels a little bit like a show and tell. That's not my intention. I just want to give you an idea of what we've done in a short amount of time and kind of share some of the victories that we've had in the work that we've done. So the program is, this initiative is 100% volunteer driven, including my role, and it's guided by our Fostering Terp Success Working Group. I'm pleased to see that we have a couple members of our working group part of this convening today. We're incredibly fortunate to have so many members of our university community that are dedicated to this work. And so one of the first things we did was form a working group to talk about this issue of basic needs and security and to figure out what we might be able to do about it using the resources we already have on campus. So I think that was a really critical piece. Our vice president at the time had started to hear some conversations nationally and also within the state of Maryland about some questions raised about what folks were doing at their institutions. And so she knew that I had an interest and said to me, basically, figure this out, and there's no money to do it. And so that was our task. And so we brought this great working group together, made up of individuals from across the institution. And part of that was utilizing my social capital to say to some folks that I've had a relationship for a while, hey, I need your help because I know that you will do a great job. And there were other folks who I knew were very close to this issue or were very much student facing and have worked with students who likely have faced basic needs and security. So we gathered together and did a lot of research, took a look at what other institutions were doing, had conversations with folks that were doing this work to find out what worked well for them and what didn't, and what advice they had for us. And then we developed our program. So the mission of our program is to increase the academic and personal success of students who were or are in foster care, students who are experiencing homeless instability, and students who are without a supportive family system. Through our campus-wide network of support, we work to provide support, remove barriers, and assist students in accessing essential campus services, navigate their challenges, and develop self-advocacy and life skills. So all really important pieces. At the bottom here are a couple of our campus partners. So we're really thankful for the support of our partner organization, Fostering Change Network. And we also have a CCMA AmeriCorps Vista. That was a grant that we were funded for 3 years. And so Alex Elliott, who helped put this convening together, he is our CCMA AmeriCorps Vista, and really is the full-time person who's dedicated to fostering terp success, but really is developed, works on increasing the capacity of the program and not providing direct service to our students. Obviously, the goal of reducing poverty is paramount, as in the work we do helps provide critical resources to students by addressing basic needs. Ultimately, we hope to have enough resources to ensure that no foster care alum or homeless student has to take out student loans during their time at the university. No student in these circumstances should leave college with a loan debt that creates an additional and overwhelming financial burden and does nothing to lift them out of poverty. So that's really our ultimate goal and where we want to eventually be. Whoops. The foundation of our program is built on the 7 life domains framework, which we pulled from Western Michigan University and their terrific CETA Scholars program. This actually was adapted from Casey Family Programs, but these areas of support were identified and are important for youth and young adults and things that they need to successfully transition to adulthood. So everything that we do is focused on these, on the 7 life domains framework. So here are some things that our program does. For housing, we house our students facing homelessness. We work very hard to house them on campus and to do that as quickly as we can. Thankfully, we are in a position to have vacancies on campus, so we have the ability to house students on campus and to move them in as quickly as possible. What's especially important, which was already mentioned, is that students are housed during breaks. So even if the student has a pretty good financial aid package, financial aid only covers what are considered to be regular academic expenses. So the expenses that a student has for fall semester and spring semester, those are the things that are used together to create that financial aid package. And there is no consideration given to the cost of food and housing over winter break or summer break. We've worked really hard to meet that need during that gap to ensure that none of our homeless students are left without housing during those breaks. So we house our homeless students that live on campus 12 months of the year, and we provide funding for winter break and summer break. We also provide emergency food. We have the ability to purchase meal plans for students that need it, providing living essentials. We partnered with an organization that the universities had a long-standing relationship with. They donated 20 sets of bedding, and they'll donate more as we need it. So we do have a closet that we keep these materials in, and students can come in and pick up what they need. We did an academic supply drive. We have the ability and to award some grants to students for purchasing books. We also provide backpacks full of school supplies. So we did a drive across campus. We asked our students, what do you need? What kinds of things do you need to be successacl? And we created a list, sent this around campus, and folks donated all of the items that we needed. And then we stuffed these great backpacks that were donated by Maryland Athletics. They're the same backpacks that our athletes carry around campus when we're not in the middle of a pandemic. And so we packed all of those with the items and have those to give to students when they need them. We also purchase passes for public transportation, or if the student does happen to have a car, we work through our transportation services to pay for their parking permits for campus. We also focus on connection. So I mentioned our campus-wide network of support. We do intake for each individual student and help them connect with relevant campus resources and maintain regular and consistent contact and support for them. We have all of our students in foster and terp success are paired with a campus coach. So that is a staff or faculty member that's been through a full day training, and that person works one-on-one with them They are required to meet with their campus coach at least once a month. The coach will work with them on establishing some goals for the year and helping the student move toward those goals. We foster a sense of community and are dedicated to creating a brave space where students feel welcomed because of and not despite their circumstances. Alex has worked really hard to do that through the workshops that we provide to students. It's been a much more difficult task during the pandemic to try to do all of that virtually, but we have regular, consistent, and frequent touch points with students. We offer a lot of workshops to enhance students' skills and goes back to the developing self-advocacy and life skills. We want to make sure that students have everything they need to be successful when they leave the university. And then we conduct a lot of outreach to educate and inform the campus community about fostering TERP success. I think this is really important so that that folks around the university know what's happening, and if they become aware of a student, they're able to make that referral and talk to a student about what we provide. We also have done a lot of work to facilitate donations and fundraise. So I'll talk about a couple of those things. So that's a newsletter that we produce for students that they get regularly. The Fostering Change Network, they are one of our partner organizations, and they do all of our campus coach trainings. We are focused on, we are a strengths-based, trauma-informed approach to our work, which is really important. And so Fostering Change Network utilizes that in our training with campus coaches. We have another partner, an organization that we partner with that does final exam care packages for students. So I'm actually expecting a delivery tomorrow from this group that I'll distribute to our students first thing next week. And then one of the creative fundraising events we had during family weekend, not this past fall because no one was on campus, but a year ago, we did bingo. We had 450 people in our grand ballroom. It was a sellout crowd and had a drag queen run the bingo event, and we raised over $15,000 for fostering TERP success. I'm also really thrilled that we were awarded a grant, a YHDP grant from Prince George's County and HUD. It's a $260,000 grant for the next 2 years. It enables us to hire a full-time caseworker, case manager to work directly with our homeless students, and it'll provide winter break and summer break housing for 17 of our students. I know there was a question earlier, how do we determine students in need? So these are some of the pathways that we provide. Enrollment management does outreach based on FAFSA info. So twice a year, once in the early part of summer, and then once during the winter, they reach out to new students who, because of information that they've obtained from FAFSA, might be a good candidate for fostering TERP success. So they reach out to let them know about the program and share information with them so that they can apply for to be a part of the program if they want to do that. We also have a student crisis fund that many of our students access. Anytime a student would self-disclose on an application that they're experiencing housing instability, or if they would self-disclose about a history in foster care, that information would be shared with me so that we can do outreach to the student to let them know about the resources that we provide. Sometimes we learn about students through our campus pantry. So they've visited the campus pantry. The staff there in their conversations with the student have learned a little bit more. And so they'll make a referral to fostering TERP success for those students. We also will learn about students through different scholarship applications at the university. So again, they might self-disclose their status in a scholarship application. And so they would get referred to fostering TERP success. All of our faculty are encouraged to put this basic needs statement in their course syllabi so that students, kind of the one thing that all students receive is a syllabus for class. And so this is a good place to put that information so that students are aware of the resources. And so that's the statement that they're provided with. And then one-on-one interactions. There are lots of key pockets around the university where folks are very student facing, whether that's financial aid or our academic achievement program, or in academic advising offices. So all of those places, it's important for all of those staff and faculty to be aware of this program. Then when they are meeting one-on-one with students, and a student has self-disclosed that they're sleeping on a friend's couch, or they missed class because they're working a lot, that's a pathway for the staff and faculty member that's meeting with the student to ask more questions, to learn more, because that might be the opportunity that they learn that the student is experiencing basic needs insecurity, and then can refer them to the resources on campus, including fostering TERP success. I've talked super quickly. I only had 10 minutes. So that was a lot of information. Here's my contact information. It's bwatkins@umd.edu. There's the link to our website. I'll make sure that you all get a copy of this presentation so that you can reach out to me. And we're still going to be in conversation throughout this convening. I'm so happy to answer any additional questions. Because I was sharing my screen, I did not see any of the chats. So let me stop sharing. Okay, awesome, Alex. Thank you for responding to questions. Again, I'm not going anywhere, so I'll be sticking around for the rest of the convening so we can answer questions as we go. But I'm mindful of time and want to keep us moving forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Ingrid Lofgren, and she's going to take us into the next portion of our meeting.
Awesome, thank you. And we are actually just about perfect on time, which is amazing with so many presenters. So thanks, everyone. So Brian started us off today describing kind of the purpose of this whole conversation as an opportunity for us to learn from each other, first from being grounded in student perspectives, getting a snapshot of what Maryland institutions are doing, and then going big to hear from Jillian about national best practices. Then coming back to Brian and Alex to do a deep dive, learning more about an example of an amazing program in Maryland. So I know this has given me a lot to think about. I can tell from the chat that a lot of our wheels are turning. We're probably thinking about our own roles and our own institutions and what we could be doing or what we're already doing well. So the rest of our time together today is really an opportunity to share those ideas with each other, to have some conversation and do some brainstorming that will, as Brian stated earlier, kind of move us towards action and hopefully continued collaboration and support of one another in addressing basic needs security in partnership with students. So we're going to have some small group breakout rooms for about 20 minutes. And we'll have a facilitator in each room who will lead you through 3 prompts. The first is, what do you think the top 3 needs are that students have at your institution? Second, what strengths and limitations does your institution have with respect to addressing basic needs security for students? And then third, what are 3 concrete steps that you could take to move forward towards effectively addressing basic needs security? So with that, hopefully the magic technology will work and we will be magically pulled into all of our groups and can have a chance to get to know each other better in that space. So Alex, take us away. Poor Alex, we've put so much pressure on him to do all the tech for today, which has been really wonderful. So it's really no pressure here. If it doesn't work to break us up, then we can talk in this space too.
You should have all received an invitation to go to the breakout room.
Oh, cool. Okay. Should it pop up?
Have an option to join that room. Okay, that's weird. Let's try it again.
No worries. Because all of the presenters were so good on time, we actually are a little bit ahead and we can like take our time with no stress.
How about now? Because it's saying I'm opening them, but apparently I'm not opening them. What? What is going on? You jinxed me, Ingrid.
I know, I do that. I'm sorry.
Shall we go to plan B?
I mean, whatever you want to do, Alex. It's no problem if you want to try it again. We can hang out for a minute. It really is not a big deal at all.
One more try to reassign them.
Yeah, no problem.
Have you received the invitation this time? I'm amazed. I don't know. I'm doing it automatically. So I'm amazed that it's not working at this point. Some people are getting it properly.
Oh, yeah, I'm seeing in the
Yeah,
chat.
I see that Melina keeps getting it every time. I don't know why it's not admitting everyone. Melina, how does the invitation come to you?
There should be an icon that just pop up and it said that you have been invited to join group 1, group 2, group 3. It should be in the middle of the screen.
That's what I thought. Okay. I'm gonna make the groups one more time.
Thank you, Alex. Better you than the rest of us. We appreciate it.
Yes, give me all the pressure. It feels amazing.
I know.
My back is breaking. All right. I'm gonna open all rooms one more time. Let me know if you should have received the invitations.
I have the invitation. Am I the only one? I keep on leaving the room and then I'm like, no, I'm the only one in the room.
No,
Well,
I can see it too. I see all of them.
Really?
What's going on?
I do not see nothing over here.
So weird.
She must be popular.
I think we just need to have a large group conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what we need.
Yeah.
The universe is telling us that we all need to stay together.
Yeah.
Sounds great. And consider this our icebreaker.
I give up officially. I just want to call it.
Thank you, Alex. You're doing an awesome job. And like Brian said, maybe we're all supposed to stay together. So we're going to take until about 2:45. Again, the first question that we wanted to ask the group for discussion is, what do you think are the top 3 needs that students at your institution are experiencing with respect to basic needs security? So some of the things that we've heard discussed today had to do with access to food, affordable housing, stable housing year-round, access to technology, financial assistance, cash assistance for emergencies, childcare, transportation. Okay, so in the chat, food, transportation, and stable housing. Food, stable housing, life skills supports. For instance, food and financial resource management. Housing, transportation, and computer access. Housing, food, hygiene, clothing, utility costs, and mental health resources. And Robin noting that right now technology access is an elevated need, maybe higher right now than transportation. Connections with people in critical offices, mental health and technology, internet, housing, financial assistance, technology. So it looks like so far some really consistent themes are housing and food, with technology also being maybe a particularly critical need right now during the pandemic. Another mention of mental health and technology access and food. So we've got, people coming together from all corners of Maryland today, but it seems like there are some pretty consistent needs that all of the institutions are identifying. Yep, another emphasis on mental health. And a comment that, so mental health support is so needed, but when food and housing are unstable, it's hard to concentrate on mental health needs. So for everyone who's answering in the chat, are these the needs sort of from your perspective? And if so, do you think that students would prioritize their own needs in the same way? So, and adding to the list, childcare and financial assistance. Okay, so someone commenting that the list they gave is based on communication with students. So some sense that, these are the things that students are indicating that they have a need for. And someone else also reiterating that. Yep, these are the requests that we've gotten most frequently from students to receive emergency assistance. So it sounds like students most often are identifying needs for housing, food, technology, and there was a good amount of concern about mental health and some about transportation. So in thinking about how you are already responding to these needs and what you might be able to do at your institution to further respond, what strengths and limitations do you see in your local community context or at your institution with respect to addressing these basic needs? So strengths and limitations. I know earlier there were a few comments in the chat about housing affordability, that many institutions don't have on-campus housing, and off-campus housing in the private rental market is not affordable. And to the extent that subsidized housing resources exist, often there aren't enough resources and wait lists are very long. So essentially, there's no option for students to access subsidized housing. So Robin commenting that their institution has a really good support staff who tries very hard to make sure that students have resources they need. So staff as a strength, and as a limitation, we live in a small rural community with limited resources in general. Taria saying it's very difficult to find affordable housing for students in Montgomery County, especially with job loss due to COVID. Finding jobs is difficult for students, especially parenting students. So, you know, lack of affordable housing and lack of adequate income really go hand in hand, right? In terms of people trying to access stable housing. And right now during the pandemic, income is likely to be even more of a problem than it usually is, and very hard for parenting students in particular. So more strengths that folks are sharing, good community connections, and limitations, no campus housing, and COVID making it particularly hard to find affordable housing options. There's also a question, are there currently any statewide advocacy or policy efforts to institute policies for University System of Maryland institutions to provide housing for students in need? I think there is growing awareness that this is a critical advocacy priority. We have had some conversations in the group that put on this convening, recognizing that need, and certainly welcome anyone to that conversation, and we can start to have that conversation, even some here in this space. I think the question really comes down to not is there a need for housing policies, but what could that look like? And what would it cost and who would pay for it? So, you know, getting the state to provide some support for institutions to provide housing for students in need, for example.
Hi, this is Jillian. I just want to jump in and say, I know in California, sorry, you can probably hear other things popping up. In California, they have AB 1228, which is a law that asks colleges and universities to help students during holiday breaks. So helping them come up with some sort of plan. And although this policy has been in law for, you know, I think 2-ish, 3-ish years or so, the implementation actually hasn't been really well rolled out. So just wanted to kind of share that piece, but we are working with colleges and universities on that awareness and helping them, you know, highlight the colleges and universities that are doing a great job in implementing AB 1228.
And I thought, Jillian, that California law requires public colleges and universities to provide year-round housing at no additional cost.
Yeah, and so they are, yeah, that's also with the law as well. And in reaching out to a few different colleges and universities, some of them were not necessarily abiding by that. So because it was in law for with many other state laws, it had these provisions for foster students, and then homeless got added in. So there's some just confusion with the law still.
Mm-hmm. And along with that too was a requirement to provide priority for on-campus housing for students experiencing homelessness at institutions that provide on-campus housing. So those are the kinds of policies that we certainly could advocate for in Maryland. And it would be great to hear in the chat if you know, folks in this space today would be in favor of a requirement for institutions to provide year-round housing at no additional cost for students experiencing homelessness. So more strengths and limitations. For strengths, a small campus means partnerships across the campus, an excellent food pantry, approachability for student contact. Limitations, Mental health resources are limited to outsourcing for limited students, and lack of funding for the resources that are needed. Another institution is in the process of launching a program to provide students with coaching and accessing resources and developing partnerships, but currently there are staffing limitations. And a thank you for some good information from today's presentations and to help support that. Someone lifting up a need for advocacy and policy change related to SNAP, or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits for college students. It is complicated state by state, and there are lots of conditions for students to apply and to be approved for SNAP benefits. Absolutely, and that's another issue that this group could continue to focus on, which would be great. Another institution has weekly food distribution and monthly hygiene distribution in addition to emergency assistance. So a question, I think, related to the conversation about the possibility of requiring the provision of year-round housing at no additional cost, and how that would work with campuses that don't have housing. And my understanding is that California law only applies to schools that provide on-campus housing, right? So it's, if you provide on-campus housing, you must provide housing year-round, including during breaks at no additional cost beyond the housing that you provide during the academic terms. But of course, there's also a need to talk about strategies for schools that don't have on-campus housing. So moving on to our third and final prompt, which we just have a few minutes for. If you could pop in the chat 3 concrete actions that you think you could take to move forward on some of the ideas that you've heard today. And I think one concrete action that all of us hosting this event today would be curious about is whether you would like to convene in this group again to continue this conversation and to talk about what can be done with respect to housing and food and some of the other top needs that have been identified. And particularly if there is a policy change that's needed at the state level, or budget advocacy that's needed that goes beyond individual institutions, and that we could strategize together and partner together on. Anyone, even presenters, have anything that you want to share? Any ideas for, realistic, concrete action that folks could take? Excuse me. So FAFSA finish events are a great resource to encourage and advertise financial assistance, but might not reach certain groups like unaccompanied homeless youth. So maybe financial aid outreach events that really center homeless youth and youth with histories of foster care involvement could be a concrete strategy. For Maryland SNAP, Maryland SNAP Ed will be partnering with the University of Maryland Campus Pantry this program year to provide staff and volunteer training, nutrition education resources, and ongoing support to foster healthy pantry change and increase access to healthy food for students and staff and faculty in need of support. Awesome. So good partnerships to support better access to food. And thank you for lifting up that staff and faculty also need support and that everyone at an institution should have access to the support that they need to be part of the community. Creating a campus task force with administration support that identifies specific student needs and develops tools and resources to fill those needs. So convening the institutional stakeholders, continuing to meet in a group like this to discuss ideas, improvements, and challenges, meeting with students directly more often to incorporate their intentions into support, partnering more with on and off campus organizations to build stronger networks for students. So a lot of outreach and connecting and relationship building, which is one of the most common strengths mentioned is relationships and people who care on your staff. So really leaning into that and building those relationships. And then the next comment kind of continues on that theme of continuing to strengthen partnerships at the college and community levels to identify and address student needs, building relationships with institutions working with students to address these needs, developing a budget and getting more funding, another common theme, and more staff. So comment, I like the college admissions application question to identify and be able to reach out to unaccompanied homeless youth students, but I wonder how many students are willing to self-identify. So that was something I think that Jillian mentioned as a best practice. And I don't know if you want to comment, Jillian, but it was a list of many things. And so one of the takeaways for me was creating all of these different kinds of hopefully as low barrier as possible opportunities for students to identify themselves, you know, on a syllabus, maybe to a professor they connect with, on an application a little bit more anonymously, advertising resources that are available so that wherever that student feels most comfortable, there is an opportunity for them to kind of get plugged into resources. So I think it can't hurt to provide as many different options for that kind of self-identification as possible. Okay, so originally we had built in a few minutes for representatives from each of our breakout groups to report back. So we saved you having to volunteer to report back. And we're taking a little bit more of that time, but if anyone wants to share your last thoughts now, we'll be starting to wrap up in just a minute. So there's a comment about great ideas for student identification and wanting to further explore how my institution is identifying this when students enter the college. And I think it would be really great if we, you know, come together again in this group to share those different ways that institutions are doing outreach and identifying students. Training for campus faculty and staff to be able to respond to student needs quickly and refer them to the appropriate support services. Also really important. I think a lot of the time, you know, people who are involved in higher education care about students and want to provide support. But if you don't know what the resources are and you don't know how to connect, that can be a real barrier to being able to provide that support. Just a feeling of, I don't know what to do. And so helping everyone to understand that they can play a role in supporting students and asking students what's most helpful and how they want to be supported. Okay. So unless anyone wants to drop anything else in the chat, we will close out our discussion, our brainstorming session, and I will pass it back to Brian.
Thank you, Ingrid, and thanks to everyone for being flexible. You know, we really wanted to have a more generative conversation with everybody in a smaller group format. But Ingrid, you did a fabulous job of facilitating that through chat. So where do we go from here? I think that is the big question, and I'm glad to see that there's some energy around us continuing these conversations as a community, which is what we hope would be the outcome of this first gathering. So I think what we will do as a coalition is talk about the timing for another event and what that might look like. So if you have some ideas of what you'd like to see happen during the next meeting, if there are some concrete things that you'd like to see happen, please drop those in the chat window now, or you can also email them to one of the coalition members. Do they have everyone's contact information? Group? Ed? Isabel, anyone?
I was going to say, I think they're also getting the post-event survey, so maybe we could also send out contact information that way.
Okay, perfect. So yes, either drop suggestions of topics in the chat now, or you can share that information after you receive the post-event survey. That'll just help us shape future meetings. We want to make sure that they are beneficial for everyone. But I think it is important for us to continue to meet together and share ideas and identify ways that we all might be able to collaborate together to move this forward. I think there's a lot of energy across the state around this issue. We're hoping to see some policy adjustments to the waiver policy perhaps this year. And so, you know, by the time we meet again, we might have some other information to share out. But really appreciate the time that all of you have committed to this afternoon, and the work that you're doing in your institutions and within your organizations to support our youth and young adult basic need and security. So thank you again to everyone for joining us. Thanks to the coalition and all the folks who helped organize the convening today. And I hope that all of you have, for those that get a winter break, for all my colleagues working in higher ed, I hope you enjoy your winter break. And I wish everyone well in the weeks to come. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all.